The irony is that you truly find yourself when you give yourself away.
Broadly in the culture, it's less intimate to give yourself to someone physically than it is to actually give your heart to somebody.
Feelings are fleeting, and we cannot rely on the way that we feel in every moment.
You can't say, remember when I did this for you? That's not sacrifice, that's manipulation.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Intentional Dating with Nick and Allie. So today we're talking to Professor Tim O'Malley from Notre Dame University. Tim, thank you so much for being here. Could you introduce yourself and tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure, yeah. I'm Tim O'Malley. I'm a professor of theology at Notre Dame. I collect millions of model trains. No, I'm just kidding. I don't do that. I just thought that would be interesting if I was really to introduce myself and I did that. That would make it more interesting than I write books. I teach this big class at Notre Dame on the theology of marriage. And, I have like 270 undergrads every fall. And so I've gotten to learn a lot about the miserable love lives that they all have as 18 to 22-year-olds.
Tell us just the pulse of dating right now, like what you were just saying.
Yeah, 280 college-age students, or college students, obviously college age, every single semester. That is a huge sample size for one person. That's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, they're mostly not dating, right? And so I think that's annoying to them. They want to figure out how to date. I think a certain percentage probably hook up, but actually fewer than when I taught the course 5 years ago, right? So there's a lot of, failure in love. They're not really experiencing lots of dating. They're not all hooking up that much. Some are. They're worried about the ambiguity of what dating is and how to do it. And right, they feel sort of trapped between either first you go on a date and then you commit the rest of your life to marry the person after one date, or you hook up, and they don't seem to think about a third option.
Okay, and just for the purposes of our conversation, when you say hook up, does that mean like full blown all of it, or just like a little make out at the frat or something?
Well, it means anything. So I've learned that hookup is intentionally ambiguous. So it could be making out. It could be other things that probably shouldn't normally be said on camera, right? But that's the sort of thing that happens. Sometimes it is sex. It is intercourse. I get a lot of students who feel sort of the pain or the suffering from that when they do it. So yeah, so it's anything. It's ambiguous. I think that's the mark of hooking up. It's ambiguous.
So it sounds like, most college students who you're interacting with, who you're teaching, they either have a short-term goal in mind, nothing long-term, just short-term satisfaction, whatever, and then unrealistic views of the long-term goal or unproductive approaches to long-term goals.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And yet, right, there's a significant increasing minority that I'd say that are in fact in long-term relationships, and they're thinking about getting married, and they're thinking about getting married a little younger than 5 years ago. I mean, none of my students would think about getting married at 24 or 25 5 years ago. And now I have all these students who are taking my class with their significant other to figure out when to get married. So it's it is this kind of move. So there is a more serious trend with this generation. I think it's partially post-COVID and, thinking about long-term effects of life a little earlier than my undergraduates 5 or 6 years ago who were just thinking about moving to Manhattan and having a good 5 years.
No, yeah, it's so true. And I think that social media gets a very bad rap for polluting brains. But I actually think that for this generation, and we're seeing it, the social media, I feel like, has really impacted the way that the Gen Zers that are maybe lean a bit more conservative or they lean a bit more traditional, they finally have they have a place to go. They have representatives that are these strong influencers that are kind of making, getting married really cool. And de-glorifying the hookup culture.
Yeah.
They're just making it a lot less sexy to be in that space. So I think the algorithm, when you're on that algorithm, it's really been a game changer. And I feel like you're seeing that in real time. That's, one of the influences. So I concur. I concur, Professor.
Well, that's great to hear. Yeah, and whatever your algorithm is on social media, I need to get on it because all I get are people angry about Notre Dame's exclusion from the 2026 college football playoff.
Oh,
So
yes.
whatever
Oh,
your
yes.
algorithm is,
Oh, my
it's full of
goodness.
more hope
Well,
than
I
the
mean,
one I'm on.
that was a travesty. That was wrong. And look what happened to Miami. So what are you going to do? So, Tim, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what you teach in your class. Like, what does the work actually look like with your students? These folks who are, well, it sounds like unhopeful and lost with regards to dating relationships and learning that whole world. What is it that you actually teach?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. So it's like a second level theology course. They all have to take it, and it's supposed to just trace a theme from the beginnings of Christianity to today. And so in some ways, it's kind of a boring class, right? If they're reading Augustine and Thomas Aquinas. But we're always locating it in, modern conceptions of love and how people view love today, often negatively. So we read like a lot of sociology of love. And then they have to kind of engage with these thinkers around these questions. And I think what I find interesting is that they're just looking for a space to be reflective about their own practice. And the class kind of accidentally provides it for them while still forcing them to read a lot of theology. So yeah, they read, Christine Emba's book on reclaiming sex. They do that kind of work, but then there's a lot of internal work. And I also have a date assignment, which I stole from I know that a lot of this is based around the Dating Project and Carrie Cronin, her work. Carrie and I were grad students together at Boston College. So I stole this from Carrie, but I made it better. So if you ever see Carrie, just tell her I made her assignment better.
Will do, yeah.
But I mean, I think really at the heart of it is like a fear of vulnerability in relationship. So that's kind of what we're working on, which is if God made human beings in God's image and likeness, then the way to be human is to relate to other people and be vulnerable. And so the secret sauce of the class is really friendship, right? How can we reclaim friendship and vulnerability and being there for one another? Which I think is at the heart of the Christian narrative of what it means to be happy. That and making a lot of money. But
Yes.
I'm just kidding about that one, but it's not, alas.
It doesn't
Oh,
hurt,
it's not? Wait, I'm
Doesn't
so sorry.
hurt.
I'm so sorry.
There are certain books you can read that will tell you otherwise, but alas,
Right.
it's not in the Roman Catholic Church. So.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm a lover of the prosperity gospel. I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, all of that to say, I think it's so wow. That's what a cool thing that that these students can get into this. And
Yeah.
I wanna ask you, do you get what are the most common questions that you're getting from these students? I know that in my practice, we get kind of the same questions over and over again. Are there any just reverberating questions that you feel like you're getting consistently?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty basic, which is like, how do I tell her I actually like her?
Oh my
Right.
Yeah.
So it's often bros coming in the cover of night. As I say, like they're like Nicodemus in the Gospels. They're coming at night, and they're like, "Hey, Professor O'Malley, like, I got this girl. We've been hooking up for like a long time, and like I like it. But it turns out that I actually like her. How do I tell her that?" And I was like, "Well, a lot of what you just said, maybe with flowers." And then, I tell them they probably have to stop hooking up. And they're like, no, I know, I like, we got to. But I think that's the biggest thing is it's sort of like, how do I communicate? How do I tell someone something? How do in principle, they're asking, how do I let myself be vulnerable, right? In this situation that was born in ambiguity. And I'd like it to move from ambiguous to committed. And They just don't know how to do it because they're afraid, right? They know how to say words, but they don't know how to say the words in a way that they make their heart vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mm.
it's fascinating that oftentimes, at least broadly in the culture, it's easier to give yourself to someone physically. It's less intimate to give yourself to someone physically than it is to actually give your heart to somebody. How crazy is that,
It's so crazy. We just had a talk with a psychologist about porn.
hmm
That was one of our episodes,
Yep.
and it was just really fascinating. It all kind of ties in.
So Tim, I'm looking to see if we could explore the concept of self-awareness, because this sounds like it's related to your work. It sounds like something that kids or college students of this age need to hear. It's something that they need to work on and develop. So I'm curious your thoughts on self-awareness. Why might this be an important concept, and practically speaking, how is it useful?
Yeah, I mean, you have to kind of know about yourself, your tendencies, your trends. And in some sense, this is a group of people that are highly good at thinking about themselves, right?
Right.
They've spent most of their life branding themselves
Yep.
and presenting I mean, they wouldn't describe it at that, but presenting a kind of public brand. And I think the challenge, right, of real, genuine self identity is that you have to have people who reveal how much of a liar you are.
Mm.
And, we typically call those friends, family members. And I think a lot of what my interest in the class is actually not so much how do you build individual self awareness, but how do you actually start relying on the people in your life to tell you the truth about situations, right? That this is a destructive relationship rather than a good one, that you're less happy than you were before. And so, in that sense, it's like reestablishing, as I think, like a kind of publicness to dating that we lack, right? It's not a public event, it's supposed to be private. I meet you one on one. I match with you on Tinder. I mean, I've never been on Tinder, so because I've been married before it came along, so I don't know how it works. But I match with you, but then it's like just individuals. But can we create a community of people that are concerned about sort of helping us think, well, what are my gifts? What are my weaknesses? Where do I love well? Where do I love poorly? And that kind of self awareness only comes right in communion with other people.
Isn't that funny? I mean, well, of course, we need other people to sort of sharpen us, to work on our social skills, to help us see kind of when we're being knuckleheads and when we're actually on track to something productive and worthwhile and good.
Yeah.
I imagine that the least self-aware people tend to be the most selfish. Tend to be the most self-centered, and not a good way, because there's two different ways of looking at this. If you're focused on yourself, it's me everything and all the time, and I don't have to give consideration to other people, that does not sound like a self-aware person. So I think there's a distinction to be made there. Yeah. So wrestling with this concept a little bit, where's the balance between focusing on myself, doing the work to make myself somebody who is considerate of others. I know who I am, therefore I can make space for others, rather than somebody who is just focused on themselves all the time, and it kind of pushes others away. It seems like there's a balance that needs to be struck there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging. I think especially if we're talking about 18 to 22-year-olds who are
Yes.
kind of encouraged to focus on themselves.
Yeah,
Right?
especially
That's kind of
during
where they are.
yeah, especially during college, because that feels like I'm going away for 4 years to develop myself personally and professionally.
Oh,
And yet it's
so
reframing that mindset to also, yes, I'm focusing on myself so that I can be of service to others.
Yes, I mean, cultivating a strong sense of self-worth, self-identity is key. But of course, like the self is cultivated for the sake of gift. And right, it's never just for myself, right? How do you I've got two young kids at home. Well, they're youngish, 13 and 8. And a lot of my life is not about myself anymore. It's pretty radically about picking people up from things, driving in traffic, waking up in the middle of the night with sick people. And right, like what I had to discover in all of this is the discovery of life, is that I am fully myself when I'm giving myself away, right? Now, not to the point of destruction, but like real self-gift. And that's the kind of vulnerability. So I think the balance is, the irony is that you truly find yourself when you give yourself away, right? You truly find who you are, who you're made to be when you give yourself away, and you do that to with another person, right? Obviously, you got to work on things, right? Maybe you're a bad communicator, right? Maybe you have a tendency towards jealousy. I did when I first started dating my now wife for 20 years. And she told me once, like, you're annoying and you're too jealous and you have to stop or I'm going to break up with you.
Hmm.
And
Right.
I said, okay, that's true, right? I got to give you space and time to do other things. Um, and so that kind of like I became a better self through that relationship rather than apart from it. I couldn't have cultivated that by myself. I needed Kara to say, stop being an idiot,
Yeah.
a task she still performs for me on the regular.
Mm-hmm.
No, I
Mm-hmm.
love that so much. And I heard the word boundaries. That was what was coming to me. I don't know if you said the word boundaries, but I think that when somebody is in a single place, right? When they're a lot of, like you said, a lot of your students are single, they're kind of opting out of dating, or
Mm-hmm.
they're, fully in a relationship and like figuring out, okay, how do we do this in God's plan, and how do we be the best couple that we can be, and live out a sacred marriage and everything. But I think it's such a blessing for young men and women to have that single time,
Mm-hmm.
so they can develop themselves and their personal relationship also with God. What I've seen and what I think is really incredible, so that a person can take that time to develop themselves and to figure out, okay, what are my daily practices in my relationship with the Lord? Like, how
Mm-hmm.
can I every single day? I know for me, I listen to a sermon a day. I say a sermon a day keeps the enemy away, and the enemy still finds his way in, unfortunately. But I'm shielding myself up. But
Yeah.
I do the daily readings. I listen to the daily readings every day. So I think kind of developing and getting that self-confidence for men and for women, and realizing that especially for women, your beauty, you don't need this validation from guys. You can, yes, it's nice to be called beautiful, or to be adored, and all of that, but you are getting this validation from from a deeper place,
Right.
and you have this
Right.
confidence from a
Your
deeper place.
identity in Christ,
You're
primarily, I think. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Allie, what I'm taking from this
yeah.
is I'm supposed to go home and break up with my wife
No,
in single
no.
season. Is that right? Oh, is that what I'll tell Kara tonight. No, no,
I need a
that's
minute.
really, yeah.
No, no.
I'll tell her, listen, everybody needs a single season. I heard this today. Uh, so we're going to start now. No, you're totally right, and I think we forgot, right? I mean, when relationships often have become, especially today, a mark of success, right? Like the
Mm.
successful person has found their beloved right away, and that's what many of my undergraduates think, right? The earlier you do it, and if you don't do it, you've not succeeded,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're made for gift no matter what, and that's why I try to teach that the heart of everything is friendship, and therefore, right, it's cultivated of self, but we're all made for friendship, whether you're single or married. That the heart of this is relationship and friendship, and everybody needs that. And in those seasons when you're not dating, then you're available for other forms of self gift, right? Right, you're available to be friend, to be present to another, the gift to God, right? There's a particular kind of giftedness to that. So I think it's a really keen insight, and I promise I won't break up with my wife and blame it
No,
on
a
this
hundred
uh,
percent, a
this
hundred
event.
percent.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
I think that what you just said regarding friendship. So I've been married now for a few years, Tim, and I think that rings true with me, and I hope I get to 20 years and beyond in my marriage. But I think the friendship aspect is critical here, because I feel like most of the time in a relationship, or in a marriage, I will say, most of the time it's work. It's a lot of work. It's cultivating a relationship with the person who you live with, who you're married to. But why is friendship so central to a relationship? Why does that need to be like the grounding, the foundation of the relationship there? Why is that important?
Well, like I think if we have an authentic sense of friendship, it's not just, okay, I like this person because we all like the same movies, but we're working on like some sort of common end together. And right, and that's what marriage is. It's working on a common end, right? It's the common end of sharing love with one another, hopefully, right? If you're in a religious context, a Christian context, it's representing the beauty of Christ in the church. It's, God willing, having children and being able to educate those children. And therefore, friendship means you're working towards an end outside of yourself, right? You could think about a certain version of a relationship that is grounded in a kind of self-destructive turning exclusively toward each other. And I think like friendship is grounded in missions. It's grounded in a good that we're working on together. And it makes you laugh, therefore, right? I mean, we're in winter. It's the endless in South Bend. It just keeps snowing every day. It's like Groundhog Day, the same day again and again. And yet, right, like to be able to know, like I go home to someone and we can laugh at this and recognize this is just part of the common life we're living together. It can sustain us a lot longer than, simply being sexually attracted to one another or, finding out that we both love going to Cancun every summer and therefore we'd like to do that. I don't know when people go to Cancun. I'm Irish Catholic. My skin's very white. We try to stay away from the sun.
No, I absolutely love that. And I think mission in a relationship, I think like when somebody's in their single season, we've talked a lot about values and a lot about really figuring out what your goals are and what your mission is. And if you really have this strong calling to get married and to start a family, I think that the culture says like, okay, when it comes to relationships, how do you feel? If you're not feeling this, get out of the relationship, go to somebody else. And so it's all about feeling. But the reality of any relationship is that you're going to have days when you love the person, but you don't necessarily like the person. And that's okay. That's okay. But it's remembering what is our goal here. Our goal is marriage, family, like building an empire. I love the idea of that mission and having that in a person's single season as they're getting into the dating world of being like, all right, what's my mission? Is it building an empire? Is it building is it being the best version of myself so that I can build this empire with my partner? Because feelings are fleeting. Feelings are fleeting and we cannot rely on the way that we feel in every moment, and then make these like wild decisions based on a fleeting feeling. I can't tell you how many people have told me they've used filters on dating apps to find someone of faith, only to find that Christian is just a label for them and not a priority.
If you've gone through that struggle, we're happy to tell you it doesn't always have to be like that. SacredSpark is a new dating app made specifically for Catholic singles who are serious about a lasting relationship built on faith.
SacredSpark engages you in real conversations with curated matches. The app's audio and video features give you a holistic view of who's on the other side of the screen, prioritizing intentional relationships over shallow first impressions.
And speaking of intention, the app's intention is clear. Connect you online so you can meet offline as soon as possible.
Are you Catholic and single? Download SacredSpark and start something good.
I think this all goes back to the idea of letting relationship be a gift, letting yourself be a gift to another, making sure that you make the space to put someone else before you. I'm wondering if we could talk on that for a little bit. How is it that we should approach? How, when we're approaching dating, should we set it up so it's not me before you, it's you before me?
Yeah, I mean, well, we're all terrible at it initially. I think that's what early dating's about, right? And I think that's where so much of the self-awareness actually does come in, because you're like, oh my gosh, I'm impatient. And now there's this other person who's revealing this to me. I think it's important to say, okay, putting you before me does not mean I hate myself. It's not, oh my gosh, you're a terrible partner, therefore but I must continue. with you because I have put you before me, right? I have had students who've dated young men, young women who are not ready to date anyone. And a certain kind of false sense of Christian sacrifice would say, hey, you stay in that relationship forever because you put them before you, right? That's silly. In fact, often putting them before you means breaking up with them, right? Because they need something else. So, like practically, it means, when I ask my students who are in love, what it means that they've fallen in love, what's a mark of it? And they're always like, I used to think about the world exclusively in terms of what I'm going to get out of this, what I'll do. And suddenly I'm imagining what it's like to do something for the sake of this other person. So there's like a sign, a change, right? I think that actually is a good mark that you've fallen in love, whatever that means. That suddenly you want to do things not only because they're good for you, but they actually are good for this other person. Example I always give, like many men, when I get sick, it's like I'm dying. It's like I've never
That's
been.
how it feels.
Like there's never been suffering.
That's how it feels. It
in the
affects us
world
differently.
before.
Bless you.
It affects us differently. It just
really
does.
Right.
really
I
does.
am dying. Right.
Yeah.
I understand my wife
Bubonic
is
plague.
extreme pain once a month, but I'm sick once every 6 months. So anyway, right. Well, early in our relationship, I had a stomach bug. I was definitely dying, I presume. And I remember my wife came over after work, and she wasn't my wife at the time. And she sat there giving me one ice cube every 10 minutes
Oh my God.
as I stopped
Oh wow.
projectile vomiting all over my apartment at the time. And like she put herself at risk for infection. She certainly would have had better things to do with herself, but helping me was integral to her flourishing. And I guess that is practically what this looks like, right? That suddenly I want to organize my life according to a different series of principles than I did before.
Yeah. And I think it's super important to touch on the self-abandonment element of things. And I love that you said that you've seen, and I feel like, I'm sorry, you guys, I always, I tend to be the female advocate on the panel, on the podcast here. We had a client that she was a lovely Christian woman, was fresh on the dating scene, just had been through a really traumatic breakup. And immediately a guy from her church went beelined to her, and they immediately, this was like a couple days after this really intense breakup that she had, immediately they were going to church together. They were praying together. But he infringed on her spiritual boundary. But she didn't even realize that was a boundary that she had to have. Women give. Like, this is our nature. The feminine nature is to give. But what I think a lot of women need to learn is how to receive, but be grateful to receive, because that then allows a man to act in his masculine and to really rise up and be in that, okay, I need to now give. So this is just these are my thoughts as we're talking about giving. And I was gonna, I always disagree with Nick, but we actually agree. Like, that's the thing. Like, we actually agree, but I always like poke a little hole.
Yeah.
And
Right. So here we're talking about the idea of sacrifice, how true love does require sacrifice. It requires dying to self a bit for the sake of the other. But how is this, I'm curious to know, how is this different than compromise? Because we often hear in our culture, well, if you're going to be in a long-term relationship, if you're going to be in a marriage, it's all about compromising. It's giving a bunch of stuff up that you like for the sake of making room for another person. But is that what a good relationship is? Is that what marriage is? Just like getting rid of all the fun stuff that you enjoy in your life for the sake of, inviting someone else in? That sounds a little bit hollow. It sounds a little bit like life-taking, not life-giving.
Yeah, no, it's exactly like that. That's how bad marriage is. No, okay, so
Uh-oh.
it's like a World War II treaty. No one is happy, right? You divide up Germany, everybody gets a chunk of Germany, and then that's enough. Um,
No
no,
wonder, no wonder kids
like
are hopeless, you know?
exactly. That's the challenge. So anyway, stay in the single season if you can. Uh, yeah. So no, I mean, I think that's one of the things I work with my students on is that they have been told a lie, right? That relationships are 50-50 and therefore like we're always in this sort of compromising kind of moment. I think the difference in sacrifice is giving of self out of you recognize that the other person is yours, your beloved. I always refer to people not as boyfriend or girlfriend, but as like beloved.
Oh,
Wow.
I'm going to start using
So
that.
your
That's
beloved,
My
actually
you give to
beloved.
your beloved.
My beloved.
Um,
I used to say
yeah,
my lover,
I
but
like
it
to
doesn't quite land.
have a Victorian-esque feel to my class. So,
Yeah.
like you give to your beloved because they're good and they're worth that good. And that sometimes it really isn't about compromise as much as like, what is the good of this person that is also my good, which those goods start to line up more the longer the relationship is. So, some years ago, I was offered a different kind of job at a different institution that would have allowed me to reach a goal of mine. And I went home and I talked to my wife about it. And she said, listen, this is great for you. And I know that this is what you want. I will tell you that it's not what I want. And I don't want this. I like where we are for these reasons. And I want you to think about that right before you make the decision. And we didn't make a compromise, right? It wasn't like, okay, well, it was more like, no, she's right. These goods and her goods are better than my good. And by the way, you can't treat that bitterly, right? On the other side and be like, bring it up all the time in public podcasts. Oh wait, no, that's what I just did. So you can't bring it up and throw it in the person's face, right? You can't say,
right.
I did this. Remember when I did this for
Right.
you? That's not sacrifice. That's manipulation.
Yeah.
And but like that's the difference, right? You really do these things because they're good for you and they're good for the other, and you now recognize that common good, even if sometimes that common good comes at a cost to yourself, which it might sometimes, or at least a self that you thought was the one that you wanted, but actually there's a better self to desire.
Yeah, the constant battle of give and take, that's actually not going to work in a relationship. I don't know. Does it ever work? I don't think so.
It works. I'm just kidding. It doesn't work.
No, Allie, no.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work.
No, and I think this rings true. Like this rings true with me personally. I think in my marriage, when I'm always caught. I catch myself reflecting on this, and I'm always amazed by it. But the more that I give, the more that I get back. Always. But you can't be looking to get things back. You just have to be, I think setting the right expectation around a relationship, especially around a marriage, is, hey, this is all in. This is your life. The sacrament of marriage is not, it's not like other sacraments. It's not necessarily like baptism, for instance, where baptism occurs in a moment and then you are changed moving forward. Your reality is changed moving forward because of that. This is different because this is something that you're constantly living out. It starts at the altar, but the sacrament of marriage, a marriage continues day in, day out, every single moment. And I think that having the mindset of I need to be a giver. Being a giver will make this life better for us. I need to be of service to the relationship at all times because you get so much back. Not because you get so much back, but you also get so much back when you are constantly giving. And it's always marvelous. It always kind of boggles my mind how great something can be once you abandon yourself to it in a self-giving way.
Yeah, I love that so much. I one of the examples of just something that I worked with we work with a lot of kind of fabulous young women. And I was working with this fabulous young woman, and we set her up, and she had, things were going really well. We'll call her Jessica. Okay. So Jessica was invited to a bachelorette party. And in the bachelorette party, Jessica's been to a million bachelorette parties. You know, she was 20, 28, 29. All of her friends were getting married. Great, great, great. But this was the first time that she was going to a bachelorette party where she was in a really incredible relationship, where she really, really loved this man. She wanted to protect the relationship, all of that. So they got the itinerary for the bachelorette party, and one of the things on it was Magic Mike. Another thing, you know, the Vegas show Magic Mike. The other thing on it was like going to a club. It was a Vegas bachelorette trip. Great. So she brought it up to her partner and she was like, hey, what, like, what do you think about this? Like and then she prayed about it, obviously. I am not the word. I'm a word, but I'm not the word. So she prayed about it and then she brought it to him and she was like, hey, like, I think that I'll opt out of Magic Mike and I'll opt out of the club. Like, how does that feel for you? And he's like, that would, like, thank you so much. That would be incredible. But that's an example of a self-sacrifice. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
She also got to go to bed at 10:30.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so
Exactly.
That's not a total sacrifice. That's a win. That's a secret win that you may not recognize as a gift at the time.
Yeah, good job, Jessica. I mean,
Yep.
that's not a real
Something,
name, but
and you know that additional sleep, you appreciate it more the older you get. It
totally
just gets better and better. Oh, yeah.
Totally.
Tim, while we still have you here, I actually do have a burning question. So when people do ask me for relationship advice, you know, these poor people who come to me, a question that often gets asked is, what does it mean to put God in your relationship? Because honestly, that sounds like, I feel like culturally that sounds like a very trite thing to say. It's just like, oh yeah, make sure there's room for God. Yeah, keep God in the relationship.
Leave room for the Holy Spirit.
Exactly. But in practical terms, do you have any advice or insight on what this could actually mean? What does it mean to put God in your relationship?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And when my wife and I were dating, I remember thinking that what it meant was that we had to let our two spiritual lives be merged with each other. And we both had robust spiritual lives. It was like now we had to do everything together. And the secret about me is that, you know, like, I'm a monk who got married, right? My preference is to rise at 5:00 in the morning and pray and be alone with God, and then through the Psalms and other things. And my wife's spiritual life is distinctly not this. 5 a.m. to her is when something tragic happened, right?
Same.
Why am I awake at 5 a.m.?
Same.
Right.
And so actually for us, the way that we put God in our relationship, obviously we go to mass together. That's key. We celebrate major feasts together, right? Big feasts in the home. But actually, secretly, the way we do it is by really cultivating our personal spiritual lives. Right? My wife doesn't want to pray the Liturgy of the Hours of the Divine Office at 5 a.m, and I do. And I need it to be a decent husband at this stage, a decent father, and a decent professor, as well as a decent servant of God. And actually giving each other space to continue that personal relationship with God is, I think, how you do it, right? I mean, obviously we make decisions in light of prayer, we pray together, all those things are part of it. But I think what's often forgotten is how important that individual relationship with God remains, even in that relationship. Because no matter how much my wife knows me, she'll never know me as well as God does. And I need that intimacy as much in my life as the intimacy I possess with my beloved.
Wow. Yeah, well, yeah. That, of course, it seems obvious, but what a helpful reminder. You are still an individual person, an individual entity once you get married, and you have a unique relationship with God. It is your relationship with God, and she ain't gonna fix it for you. You know, like, she can help you. You can be of assistance to each other. That's a major goal in marriage. But yeah, ultimately it's still between you and God, and you do need to make room for that relationship. I think that's very, very helpful.
Yeah.
Now, so that's more on the marriage side of things. I'm also wondering, so Allie, you were bringing up sort of the example
dating.
of somebody infringing on your spiritual boundaries or like hijacking your spiritual life for the sake of manipulating you or something like that. Do you have advice for your students that you give when they are starting out a relationship, when they're first going on dates, around spirituality or around putting God into their relationship?
Well, actually, to be honest, when they're first starting to date, I have to admit, for some of my undergraduates who are very religious, I tell them to tone it down a little.
Really?
Right on
Okay.
the first date, right, like you don't have to discuss papal encyclicals or
That's the second date. Yeah,
sort of like
Yeah.
the history of the rise of contraception. Right, like I actually think one of the things to do is like if religion is part of your life, and for a lot of my undergraduates it is, that's one of the things you should be sharing too. And early on, right? Which doesn't mean that the whole thing is religious. And you don't move from like this is our first coffee to maybe we should do 2 holy hours a week together. Right? I think that the first move is like sharing that religious story and that desire with one another. Maybe that's the first thing to do. Can you tell your story? Can you tell me why this matters? Right, as in a normal human way, right? Rather than this is I put religion so central that I forget to be human. So, because it should make you more human. So, I think that's really essential early in dating. I do tell them to tell each other why your religious life is important, what you do to pray, how do you pray. All those things are important early on, and then even as it advances, how are we going to pray together? How will we pray if we have kids one day? Right? Those are conversations that have to be had, but it starts with saying, like, my life is organized around this love of the Lord, and I need you to know why. And I think like that vulnerability comes. Now that's probably on a second or third date, after you find out how many siblings they have.
No,
Right.
yeah. I mean, I love that advice so much. I know for me, it's been so incredible in my relationship with my beloved. I love that term. I'm using it
That
from
is a good
now
one.
on.
That is good.
Anytime we're doing a meal of any kind, we say grace. And it doesn't matter where we are. We could be at the most fabulous 5-star restaurant in Beverly Hills, or we could be just like, ordering California Chicken Cafe from Uber Eats at my place. Like, so it doesn't matter where we are. We do grace, and we don't just say, we do bless us, O Lord, and these like gifts which we receive from the bounty through Christ our Lord, of course. But like we also pray, like I take one turn and he takes another turn, and that way I can hear what's on his heart and how he talks to God, and like I can get a little peek into his relationship with God. And then you can really see a lot from that. So for me, that's been really helpful. I also love, for me, it's been amazing to do a Bible reading every night. We're reading right now the book of Sirach.
Oh, Sirach. Yeah.
Sirach? I'm sorry. I'm like, Book of Sirach. We always joke and say Sriracha, and so now that's all I think of.
It's a spicy book,
Yeah. The Wisdom of Ben Sirah, that's also better known as. So yeah, I mean, it's so, but it's so great. And then we do discussion questions after, and it sounds a little like a lot, but also for what I've learned is, it is really important to be with somebody that will do those things and is excited to do those things
and shares your values, has the same goals, mission aligned.
Mission aligned.
Yeah.
So for me, I've thought that I've really loved. I've loved doing that, and I've been recommending these practices to the girlies and to the guys too.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, Tim, this has been absolutely fantastic to have you on. We've enjoyed this conversation. I think we've
So
gleaned a
much.
lot of helpful advice. I think young folks will be able to take a lot from this conversation. Would you have any additional closing advice, anything that we didn't cover, any final words that you would want somebody who's maybe in their 20s, is looking, doesn't know how to find somebody, isn't sure how to ask a girl out? Any closing advice for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think divine providence is a real thing for me, and it doesn't always mean that it's pretty, right? It's not some sort of things automatically turn out as you hope they will one day, but that in God's loving providence for you, God loves you personally and wants you to flourish personally, and that's going to happen in the way that it's going to happen. And that's a great gift. It's hard and it hurts, right? The thing about divine providence is you never recognize it until 20 years after it's all over. And so that sort of hope and trust of God's loving care and solicitude for you is everything. So that's not so much advice, but a sort of subtle reminder. Of course, I have other questions about when someone else on this call is going to get engaged, when that's arriving, is it soon? But that's another day.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes.
Right.
Just pray for me.
Right.
Lord knows I need it.
But that is a wonderful place for us to end, and an incredibly important place for us to end.
Yeah.
It's not on our timing. This is God's plan, and if we are continually trying to align ourselves with God's will, it will happen in the way that it should, and that the way that He intends. So that is incredibly helpful, I think, for all of us to remember, no matter what stage we're at, whether we're dating, engaged, married for 20 years, married for 50 years, as long as we are trying to do our best, and as long as we're trying to align ourselves with God's plan, I think things will go the way that He wants. Well, Tim, thank you so much for coming on. We've loved having you. I mean, we'll have to have him on it another time, I'm sure, of course.
Definitely.
Yes.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you so much for being here, Tim.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, take care, everybody.
Bye.